My name's Sue Hatcher. I'm the program coordinator of the Sheep Reproduction Strategic Partnership. So welcome to our webinar. So today the focus is really on ewe mortality, shared reproductive performance and increased weaning weights and weaning rates. And one of the things that SRSP or the program is interested in is really about sort of really highlighting the importance of ewe and sheep reproduction to as a priority for most producers. But also one of the things we always like to do is think about the next generation and also capacity building for the future. So I'm really pleased that we can feature some early career researchers giving us an update on these key research projects that MLA and AWI are funding currently. So welcome along, and this webinar is being recorded. So can I just please ask, apart from the speakers, just to have your video turned off and also to make sure everyone has muted themselves. So we all should know by now how to run things with Zoom. So just mute yourself, have your video off, and then use the chat function if you want to ask a question. So we'll have each of our presenters will give their sort of 10 to 12 minute presentation. I'll look through the chat, we'll ask the questions on your behalf, and then we'll move on to the next, and then we'll have a general discussion at the end. So the partnership, as I said, it's a program of work that MLA has, and it's really looking at highlighting the importance of sheep reproduction as a research priority that comes up through the RACs and is important to sheep producers. So one of the key things that the partnership does is we really promote the sort of best practice management through the breeding cycle for producers to lift reproduction rates, and also look at where the gaps are in research, development, and extension, and make sure we've got projects and activities that fit those gaps to lift our overall goal of improved weaning rates in a profitable and sustainable way. A lot of the work that we do, we're putting together the research and all the SRSP activities into a one-stop shop on the website. So you can have a look, go to the SRSP website. It'll give you more information on the partnership. You can see the rDNA alert newsletters we put out once a month with all the current research and events related to sheep reproduction. And this is where you'll find the recording of today's webinar as well. And we're also setting up direct links to current projects, so you can click through and see where our projects are up to in terms of the current process, and have an idea of the portfolio of research that's underway in this area. So today, as I said, we are focusing on 3 projects, the current projects within MLA's sheep and goat productivity program, and we're really highlighting early career researchers as part of the process. So we've got 3 presentations, 4 speakers. This last presentation is going to be a joint effort, I understand. So our first presenter is Bea Kirk, who's a PhD student at the University of Melbourne. And she's going to talk to us about the prevalence. I'll just make Bea the host. Just hang on a second. So Bea's going to talk about the Merino ewe mortality project, which started about 12 or so months ago. Give us an update on that project, and I'll hand over to Bea. So share your screen and off you go.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity to speak today, Sue. So I'm going to be talking about why merino ewes die and what we can do about it. So I'm actually going to be talking about my trial sites for my PhD trial in Western Victoria. But just sort of to increase some awareness about the overall merino ewe survival project. Here we go. So just if you haven't heard about it yet, or reminding you about it if you have heard about it. So this is a nationwide project funded by MLA and AWI, and it's running in 7 different regions of Australia and involves vets in each region. So last year, this project collected data on 74 farms across the 7 regions. And this year, they're trialling interventions in each region that are relevant to each region based on the data they gathered last year to try and reduce ewe mortality. So my PhD is separate to this, but very much sits alongside it. So we know that the late pregnancy and lambing period carries the highest risk for ewes to die. And so that's the area, the time of year that we're focusing on to try and reduce ewe mortality. And this fits in really nicely with the SRSP. And yeah, as I said, I'll be presenting the preliminary results from the Western Victorian sites. So what I'm doing specifically in my PhD is looking at a ewe's risk of dying based on her condition score. So whilst we all know about the work done by Lifetime Ewe, and that showed us that the ewes in very low body condition score, so condition score 2, are at higher risk of dying. And we have a recommended condition score profile for ewes throughout the production cycle. But this project, so a lot of the work done to date has been also looking at the ewe body condition score in regards to lamb mortality or future productivity of the lambs, but I'm looking specifically at the ewe. So I want to know what the risk of a ewe dying is at various condition scores, so that producers, if they know this, they can then make informed decisions about how they're going to manage these ewes going forward. And MLA is funding my trial, as well as the wider Merino ewe project. So this is what I did last year. We had 3 farms, 1,500 ewes in total, and we condition scored ewes when they came in for their pre-lambing treatments. So I recorded their condition score specifically like against their electronic ID, and also recorded their age based on their tag colour. Then between set stocking and lamb marking, the producers did their checks throughout lambing as they ordinarily would, or as they saw fit as things progressed. But if any ewes died or needed to be euthanized, I went and post-mortem them if at all possible. And as part of that post-mortem, I collected some eye fluid from the ewes to then test at the end for calcium, magnesium, and beta-hydroxybutyrate, which tells us about whether they had preg tox. And I also recorded the ID of these ewes that had died. Then once the ewes had finished lambing, when they were yarded again, I went back and scanned the tags of the ewes that were present, and also condition scored as many as I could. So then I had a record of which ewes had definitely died and which ewes had definitely survived, and I could then look back at their condition score pre-lambing. So in terms of the results from last year, over in the 3 monitor mobs on the 3 farms, we had between 0.4 and 5.4% mortality rate. And that's pretty consistent with what's reported in the literature to date. In terms of causes of death, we had confirmed cases of metabolic disease, so hypocalcemia and pregnancy toxemia, and occasionally both. And dystocia was also reasonably common, and that was sometimes a malpresentation dystocia, so a leg back or a head back or 2 lambs coming at once. But there were some cases that had signs that the ewes had what we call secondary dystocia, where the uterus sort of muscle becomes exhausted because it's low in calcium, and so it can't contract. And that was the reason for the dystocia. We had a couple of cases of uterine rupture from dystocia, and also a couple of cases where the ewe had lambed and maybe with a history of needing some assistance, and then she went on to develop a uterine infection. And then there were some other things, a few gut problems, worms, and signs of bacterial enteritis. And in about half the cases, it wasn't just a single cause of death for the ewe. It was often sort of multiple things, or during post-mortem, we noticed a couple of other things going on in the ewe that increased her risk of dying. And in terms of the interim results for the body condition score aspect, so pre-lamb condition score was significant, so it did significantly affect a ewe's risk of dying. And we used a few different models to look at this. So in 3 out of the 4 models, it was significant, but it was only one factor in determining risk of death. The scanning results, so by that I mean whether she had 1 lamb or more than 1 lamb, was significant. but farm and tag colour, meaning age, were not significant. And this is a bit different to what's been reported in the literature so far. So we know that older ewes are more susceptible, have a higher risk of dying. And I think in this case, it's just down to sort of lower numbers. This year, we're looking at, we're monitoring 3,000 ewes on 3 different farms in Western Victoria, and we started earlier this year, so either just before or just after joining. I've done about 30 postmortems. So whilst we're still collecting the final data to be able to look at mortality rate and the effective condition score, starting earlier means that we're able to look at condition score change during pregnancy and how that affects the risk of death, not just absolute condition score. So in terms of causes of death this year, we've had, again, some cases of suspected metabolic disease. So once we send off the eye fluid results at the very end, we'll be able to confirm those or not. Some cases of dystocia again, and sometimes you couldn't actually see anything externally on the ewe, and it was only during the postmortem that we could see that she died of dystocia. We had some cases of pneumonia, and that varied from sort of only a small part of the lung affected to, definitely being a contributing factor to quite severe pneumonia. And we had some cases of vaginal prolapse or bearings as well, and then a few different things, infections, etc. So in terms of an overall summary, at this stage, so again, we're still analysing this data, but we just need to bear in mind that these couple of years of data collection have been very dry years in Western Victoria. And whilst obviously there's nothing that we can do about that, that's just something to bear in mind, that the causes of death would be quite different in very wet years. Also, one thing that was quite a common finding was that ewes often had thin bones, which indicated low calcium stores. So I've got a picture of a bone here. So as part of the postmortem procedure, I cut the thigh bone of the ewe in half, the top of the thigh bone. And so I've got a picture of what I mean here. And so this is a thigh bone. So this would be where the hip joint is. And the walls of this bone or the sides of this bone are very thin. And there should also be some spongy bone filling up this part of the top of the bone here, but that's completely gone. So the ewe's been reabsorbing calcium over time. Hypercalcemia was often present in the eye fluid samples, and sometimes it was the cause of death, and sometimes it was actually caused by the disease process. So it was a valuable test to do. And often there were sort of underlying problems in the ewe, or potentially multiple contributing factors to her dying. And condition score is significant, but it's only part of the story. So moving on from that, as we're sort of wrapping that trial up, we're starting a visual condition scoring trial as well, where I'm getting producers to condition score sheep by eye, and then go back and actually put a hand on those sheep and compare their 2 assessments. So compare how accurate their visual assessment of sheep is. And we're doing this in different types of sheep and different wool lengths. So if this sounds like something that you're interested in or would like more information on, please just email me. We'd love to hear from you. So yeah, I'm going to open up for questions, but I've got a long list of people to thank and acknowledge, including certainly the producers that participated this year and last year, and also MLA and AWI for funding.
Thank you, Bea. A great overview of that project. There's no questions coming up in the chat. So just a reminder, if you have any questions for our presenters, because there's a lot of people online today, please put them in the chat and I will ask them on your behalf. But I was quite interested with the comment you made about the sort of thin bones in those ewes with the post-mortem. Do you think that might be related? Was that related to litter size? So do ewes that have a history of more twins, are they reabsorbing more calcium, causing that problem?
Oh, potentially. I think it's quite multifactorial. So definitely we know that the fetus or fetuses demand a lot of calcium in late pregnancy. And so if they're trying to put calcium into 2 sets of lamb's bones, then their requirements would be higher, and so therefore they potentially be absorbing more. But I think it's also related to things like age, whether they've been supplemented with lime in the past, history of grain feeding without lime, etc. So I think it's quite multifactorial.
So calcium comes up quite a lot. So should we be looking at like routine supplementation of calcium just as a go-to just to stop some of these problems?
Oh, that's actually one of the interventions that's being trialled in the larger Merino ewes survival project. So I'd be really interested. That's being trialled in a couple of regions. So yeah, I'd be really interested in their results when they're out.
So we just have a question from Alice Weaver, who's complimented you on the summary of the project. So well done. And she wanted to know if you have any data on pastoral quality.
Not on. We didn't take pasture samples, but the producers did provide pasture like food levels at various stages through lambing.
Okay. And just another question. So this person doesn't have their name on the question. They missed the start, so they're just wanting to know how was condition source significant. So was it the lighter ones or the heavier ones that was what was the impact?
Yeah, it was the lighter ones. Yep, yep. So we looked at it a few different ways. So just as a number, firstly, and then in categories. So we had like a high, medium, and low category, and a 4 category. So low, okay, optimal, and
Yeah.
high. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we looked at it a few different ways. And yeah, it was the lower ones that were significant.
Okay, and just one more before we move on. And again, there'll be time for questions at the end. Pietro Celli wanted to know if you've checked the vitamin D status of the ewes, if you were taking any blood samples.
No, we didn't take any blood samples, and no, we didn't. That's not something that we looked at. Would be interesting though.
It would be,
Next time.
definitely. Okay, so let's wrap up that one. And as I said, if you think of any more questions for Bea, we'll have time for those at the end. But certainly, again, even if you come up with them after that, you can contact myself through the program and I can pass those on and facilitate those answers. So Bea, can I ask you to make Bobbie the presenter, please?
Yep.
And so our next presenter is Bobbie Lewis-Baida. I hope I said that correctly. She's recently finished her PhD, and she was looking at heat and thermoregulation impacts on fertility. Now, Bobbie is going to give us an update on the Shedders reproduction project that's currently funded. And I'm sure, given the change in a lot of talk in the industry about breed substitution, this is really something of interest. So over to you, Bobbie.
Thanks so much, Sue. I'll just share my screen. See, that works. Yeah, so thanks so much for inviting me to speak about the project today, which is titled Quantifying and Improving the Reproduction of Australia's Shedding Sheep Flock. So I'm the postdoc assigned to this project and essentially coordinate it based here out of Roseworthy. But of course, we have a huge project team behind us. And yeah, thanks to the support from MLA for funding the project. So we're about 2 years into data collection for this 4-year project. So while it's still early days in terms of full outcomes, we certainly have been seeing some interesting trends, which I'll share with you today. And yeah, it's just a good opportunity to share what the project's about, its scope, why it's relevant to the industry, and what we've achieved so far. Oops, sorry. Yeah, so back in 2002, MLA called for a tender, which was benchmarking the reproductive performance of shedding sheep. So fortunately, the tender was awarded to the University of Adelaide and the team of collaborating consultants, and it was formally contracted towards the end of 2023, I believe. So following that, we started with a thorough literature review to review what is known about the reproductive potential of shedding breeds and sort of how much variation there is across breeds and regions. There's pretty limited resources out there relating to the reproductive shedders. So certainly a project that's in need. So following the lit review, we then put out an expression of interest to producers. So it's a national project. So we put this out nationwide through various breed groups and producer groups. We then gathered that information, and producers could sort of say what level of involvement they would like in the project. So they would either be wanting to be a core producer, a core site, or a self-reporting site. So our core sites have direct involvement with members of the project team. So we go out on site, we have quite a strong rapport with these producers, and we go help them collect data at various time points, especially those major reproductive milestones like joining, marking, weaning, and pregnancy scanning. And then the self-reporting sites, those that want to stay in the loop, they're already collecting good quality data, and they were willing to contribute this data towards the project. And that could be either at an individual level, so tracking ewes via EID, or at mob-based level. But all our core sites are following individual ewe data. So this is our project team, as well as the distribution of our core and self-reporting sites. So there's 6 of us in total to service both the types of sites. So we have 21 core sites across the country and over 30 self-reporting sites. So the core sites are in red and the self-reporters are in grey. If producers also just wanted to stay in the loop, we had an option just for them to be on the mailing list, which we send regular newsletters and updates on the project. So our management team consists of myself, Associate Professor William Van Wedder, who is the project lead, as well as Anne Collins, who's a project advisor based out in Corn. We then have 3 interstate consultants. So Dr. Michaela Seal over at GenStock in WA. She services 4 core sites over that way. Beck Brayley up in Queensland from DAF, who's got 1 or 2 sites up there. And then Dr. Tim Goll and his team from For Flock's Sake over in Dubbo, who services, I think, half a dozen sites over there. I think, as Sue highlighted, I think the importance of the project is pretty clear. So just not as much is known about the reproductive potential of our shedding breeds, and what is cause for some of the variation in this productivity that we are seeing. So MLA recently reported shedding sheep to be the fastest growing breed type, and have certainly seen this progression due to things like lower infrastructure needs, decreased labour, as well as their resilience and potential fertility and fecundity benefits. The low input, I guess, is especially attractive to producers in those pastoral regions, and what is sort of traditionally considered as that hardy sort of merino country. So I have briefly mentioned a few of these already, but the main goals were to address this knowledge gap in the reproductive potential of our shedding breeds, and try to identify optimum production and reproductive metrics that can be achieved. So, how we can benchmark and how producers can sort of measure up to flock averages. We wanted to look at how producers were managing their joining strategies year to year across the life of the project, and what seems to be working and what isn't working. We also just wanted to identify where these unexpected or increased losses are occurring, and what strategies can be put in place to either overcome or counteract some of these losses. So as I mentioned earlier, this project was contracted out in November 23. So the data collection began shortly after that. So all these metrics are pretty standard measures that are collected from most producers, aside from probably body condition score. So yeah, you can see on the screen, obviously, a list of the metrics we're collecting: body condition score, live weight at critical points, fetal number, wet and drying of the ewes at marking and or weaning, as well as RAM assessments. We're looking into shedding scores. So Sheep Genetics have just put out an updated scoring system for shedders, and it's going to be added as a breeding value as well. So our stud producers can include that in their ASVVs. And, we're trying to identify if there's any link between shedding ability and reproductive potential as well. As some producers seem to, they say, like, or the most productive ones always seem to be the ugly, shaggy ones. So we're trying to see if there actually is any relationship there. And yeah, so far we're tracking over 20,000 ewes and rams. And this has resulted in over 135,000 data points already. So records on those animals, whether that's a live weight, condition score, shedding, etc. So all against the animals. So we're really focusing on pre and post joining, that nutrition plan throughout joining, especially in our young animals, which I'll talk about a bit later, pregnancy scanning and marking. So the next sort of step is also identifying some focus flocks, which are a selection of either of the core sites or separate groups of the separate sites. And we want to try to get some more intensive reproductive data from these sites, such as ovulation rate, so follicle scanning these animals, getting additional pregnancy scannings, and then really trying to follow through and get lambing, lamb survival, cause of death, mothering up, and that sort of thing. So we're focusing on trying to get some stud sites that are already sort of collecting that more intense data so we can really pinpoint where this reproductive wastage is occurring. So yeah, I just want to touch on how we are managing and making use of this data. So as part of the project, we contracted a software engineer, Adam Lloyd, from Evolved Projects, and he designed a platform specific for the project where all the data can be aggregated and managed, especially because it's a nationwide project and there's a lot of team members involved. So each team member can access this and access their sites and keep data up to date, and it's all in the same format. So that's how we're managing it, and obviously analysis is ongoing. So I'll go through some trends so far, just to preface, obviously these are preliminary and they're going to be subject to change as we keep analysing it and keep adding to the records. So firstly, just looking at scanning rates that are being achieved. So this is the number of fetuses per 100 ewes. And generally we like to split the cohorts into maiden ewes and mature. Obviously, maiden ewes is up for interpretation. Obviously, it's a ewe at her first joining, but obviously there's a lot of different age groups that people join their maidens at. So we're also going to be considering this further in the analysis. You know, are they 6 months old, 7 to 9, 12 months, or 18 months old? So we still need to sort of split this up, but just as a starting point, we've split it as maiden versus mature. So as you can see, majority of maidens are scanning up between 80 to 110%. But there's also just a huge amount of variation, as you can see, among these scanning results. Again, this is likely due to some of their variation in their exact age as well. So there's particularly young animals are probably not scanning up as well as the older maidens. So yes, and then our matures scanning up sort of majority between 120 to 150%, with some high achievers managing to reach that 160% mark. What's important to consider is accelerated joining strategy. So obviously some are annual joiners, which I should have mentioned before. Some of our core sites are annual joiners, but a lot of them are incorporating accelerated joining strategies. So joining every either 6 months or 8 months. We logistically couldn't include continuous joiners in the project just because there was no way to manage these joining strategies and sort of monitor those animals. But there certainly are plenty doing a continuous joining approach as well. And just to, considering the different years we've had across states, I also split this up based on state. However, climate and rainfall obviously doesn't switch off at the state borders. So similar to what Bea did, we want to look at regions. So we can compare across climatic zones. So those are that are recognised regions with similar temperature and rainfall patterns rather than just states. But it really highlights the range of scanning rates that we're seeing across sites, as well as where the majority of farms are sitting relative to the national average for each age cohorts. Now, we obviously do have sites in Queensland, but we only had 1 or 2 data sets, so I didn't include it in this specific graph, but obviously will be included in future analyses. Just a quick look at joining season in relation to the scanning percentages. So as you can see, our summer joining is achieving the highest scanning rates. Obviously, there's probably likely a bit of a numerical bias here. As you can see, there's over 10,000 individuals in the summer joining cohort and only 1,200 in the winter. Because I suppose what you'd expect is a little bit of seasonality occurring and the winter joining to perhaps outperform those joined in summer. But as you know, breeding out of season is common practice, and you know, when it's managed well, we still achieve sound conception rates even in the more seasonal breeds. But yeah, I think it's probably just a bit more of a numerical bias there, as well as obviously those that are annual joining. If this is their regular joining strategy in the summer months, then that's going to be reflect the scanning results. So now just taking a quick look at ewe weight at the time of joining against scanning rate in our mature and maiden cohorts again. The only obvious limiter in adult ewes is when they sort of weren't over that 50 kilo mark, which is of course pretty rare. Generally they're well over that. And you can also see it taper down a bit when they're sort of over that 90 kilo mark. I suppose none of this is, you know, brand new information. It's just good to support existing findings in these different breeds and just following these trends. It's also important to note that for these graphs, everything's pulled together in terms of like your breeds and weight ranges. So sometimes little trends can be lost when everything's pulled together. So we'll definitely be splitting by different breeds, regions, like I said, and further breaking down the ages of these maidens as well, and amateurs for that matter. So also just having a quick look at body condition scoring as well, again, splitting by fetal number. Here you can see a larger effect of weight at joining as opposed to body condition score. But again, it's harder to draw these conclusions when you're sort of pulling everything together. But for memory, although these are pretty marginal differences, I'm pretty sure they were significant. So obviously your multiples are generally at a higher weight range in better condition as well, unless they're too far the other way and too heavy. So one of the outcomes of the project is wanting to look at the success of maiden or young ewe lamb joining. So this is a bit of a case study. So this was Anne Collins's site out in Kokaliki, so an ultra white stud out there. And she wanted to look at how the gains during joining affect pregnancy outcomes. So these ewes were about 12 to 18 months old. And what you can see is this figure shows the relationship between live weight as well as the rate of gain during joining and how those relate to pregnancy outcomes in maiden ewes. So on the left, you can see joining weights. Ewes that went on to scan empty were on average about 2 to 3 kilos, I think, lighter at the start and at the end of joining than those that conceived singles or twins. And on the right, the average daily gain bars show a really clear gradient. So empties averaged around 28 grams per day, singles about 55 grams per day, and then our twins are about 75 grams per day throughout joining. All these differences were statistically significant, even as we also adjusted for the starting weight as well into that analysis. So in other words, heavier ewes perform better and ewes that gain more weight through joining had higher pregnancy rates. This figure, we then wanted to look at if there's any predictability in relation to average daily gain. So the x-axis shows average daily gain during joining from a negative to zero gain to strong positive gains. And the coloured curves show the predicted chance of each outcome. So starting on the left at negative or zero gains, the probability of scanning empty is very high, so about 60% empty, and at less than 50 grams a day, and still 50% empty at maintenance. So as soon as you start gaining 50 to 100 grams per day, empties drop sharply. So if we're at 50 grams per day, only about 40% empty, and at over 100 grams per day, only about 33% empty in these young ewes. So essentially each 50, we were able to predict that for each 50 gram per day increase in average daily gain, this reduces empties by roughly 10%. So this model also shows that singles dominate across most realistic gains, which is probably ideal in your maidens to reduce birthing difficulties and other issues that are associated with their first lambing. These predictions, I guess, mirror the industry message. So keep maidens gaining modestly but steadily through joining. There comes a point where gaining any extra is really not adding any further benefit to your pregnancy outcomes. I took a look, so this was Anne's approach and sort of Dan Schupan. So they did a PDS in Dorper reproduction, and they wanted to sort of incorporate frame size. So rather than just looking at body condition score and weight separately, they wanted to try to integrate the two and see how the frame size was affecting scanning outcomes. So these were also in young ewes, so less than or equal to 18 months old. And although their rates were very much over 140% in their findings, but I did actually find a similar trend with our data so far. So you can see about a 23 and 61% increase when compared to ewes over body condition score 3 and 4, respectively, in that heavier cohort. So again, breed and precise age plays a huge part in joining weight targets. And you can see that the total numbers are a little bit unbalanced here, but essentially we're seeing that in those larger animals that are not too fat, you're achieving your highest pregnancy outcomes. All right, some key takeaways to finish us off. So the highest scanning rates in our maiden cohort, less than 18 months of age, appear to be those in that higher weight range, but not too heavy. So that 1 to 3 condition score. Our summer joining yields the highest scanning rates. Could potentially be a numerical bias, like I mentioned. In general, we're seeing huge amounts of variation in scanning rates. This was the same in marking rates as well. I sort of took that out because I had quite a lot of information to show, but we also saw huge variation in our marking rates. So between less than 60% to 130% lambs marked per ewes joined. So just huge amounts of variation as well, as is expected. I suppose the main advantage of our shedding breeds is to be able to push them essentially straight from weaning into another joining. So getting those 3 lambings in 2 years or more. And, they're generally coming back in pretty quick and rejoining up with success. I do question some that, their ewes are in too high condition and they keep their lambs at foot. And recently I was at a site and they just didn't get the best scanning results and they still had quite big lambs at foot. And huge udders. So they were still supporting the lambs, but the scanning rates were quite poor. So, short of not wanting them to get too fat, we're wanting to also investigate how that affects them rejoining, and if it's important to have that weaning process so they can scan in lamb again next time round. So in many cases, they don't necessarily scan up huge amounts of twins, but if their lambs are surviving through to weaning and we're able to push them a bit harder, we can see gains that way. So where to next? So again, I just want to preface that we'll be breaking down age groups, breaking down breeds and regions, and getting a lot more intensive reproduction data, like I mentioned. So where are these reproductive losses occurring? Is it increased mortalities among maidens? Is it fetal loss, embryo loss, or just poor joining, or ram issues as well? So yeah, I like to compare how some of the breeds are comparing with one another, look at weaning rates and compare regions as well. And yes, that is all. Thank you guys. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Bobbie. That was a really good overview of the project. There are a couple of questions, but I'll sort of start off. That's my prerogative as a chair. One of the things that sort of comes up a lot as to why people change to shedders is they think, they're sort of easy care, we don't have to do as much to them. But your early results have clearly shown us that you actually, that the same principles apply. So what we know with the importance of condition score during joining, particularly for young ewes and merinos and in maternals, the same thing applies. So, thinking that we can just let them off and do their thing, it's really not going to happen, is it?
I suppose yes and no. I guess an important thing to note is that we did have a very tough season last season. And there was a huge amount of variation in a lot of the sites in the condition of their ewes. And, you know, they were often like, oh, they're always fat, like this is not normal. So some of the results may reflect that, but I certainly think it's still an important management factor to consider. And definitely if you want to get the best out of your flock, I still think, looking at these metrics is super important.
Yep, thank you. So Pietro is wanting to know if you have any explanation for the better scanning percentage of maiden ewes in New South Wales.
Yeah, I think they had a less harsher year last year. That may be reflective of that. There's also just a lot of good operators over there, and same with that tightness we saw in WA. Just some really, really good operators that have been doing it for a long time. And obviously we have variation in, you know, experience of the producers with shedding breeds, and that varies across sites. But in general, most of the producers that are on board are pretty good operators, and so that's where you're seeing those higher results.
Yep. Okay, and just one more before we go to the next presentation. Alice is wondering if you had any preliminary data on ovulation rate, because that will obviously set that baseline for reproductive wastage.
Yeah, no, not yet. We do have a focus flock here at Roseworthy, so we did follicle scan them this season, so it'll be interesting to look into. And we've got a couple of site visits looking at ovulation rate coming up, so we'll be keen to see those results moving forward with our focus flocks, and trying to see where these losses are occurring. And
So sorry for the background noise. As usual, when I'm hosting a webinar, my neighbour has decided to mow their lawn. I'll mute myself in a second. One more question, just a quick one. Elsa is wondering whether you accounted for the increasing weight of the gravid uterus in those daily gain calculations when you were fitting daily gain in the expected outcome.
No, that's interesting, but no, we didn't. We haven't considered that. No.
Okay.
But,
all right. Okay. Well, great. Thank you very much. And again, we can come back to more questions at the end of the webinar if we have enough time. So, Bobbie, can I ask you to make Megan the presenter, please?
Yeah.
While I do the introduction.
Yes.
So our third presentation for today is a joint presentation, new approaches to increase sheep weaning rates. So we're going to hear from Megan, who is working as a grant-funded researcher at Adelaide University as part of the Davies Livestock Centre, and also from Billie-Jaye, who are working together on this project. So Megan, are you able to share your screen?
I can't seem to. Is my screen stop sharing?
No. So can you stop sharing, please, Bobbie?
No, that's end meeting. Oh, here, sorry. Wrong screen. My bad.
All right. And then Megan,
then
hopefully you can.
I can't. And then it's make her the host. Oh, this worked in our run through, but I'll make her. Got it. Okay, perfect.
There we go. Okay, now you're the host and you should be able to share. Thanks, Megan and Billie-Jaye. There we go.
All right, is that all good? Yeah. Thanks, Sue, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to present today. So my name's Megan, this is Billie. Hello. Next to me. So we are both researchers at the University of Adelaide, Davies Livestock Research Centre. So today we're discussing the project New Approaches to Increase the Weaning Rate of the National Flock. And that was mostly looking at improving lamb survival. So that project was a big collaborative project between the University of Adelaide and SARDI, so South Australian Research and Development Institute, as well. So,
cool. Okay. Well, as most of us probably on this webinar are aware, obviously higher lamb mortality rates are a significant problem in Australian sheep flocks to date. So it costs, there's production losses of around 540 million per year. And twins account for a large majority of these losses. Hang on, sorry guys, we're just having some technical difficulties apparently.
Your audio was a lot clearer than the last thing you said, so I think if you stay close, I think we're right.
Can you hear us well now?
Yeah, that's good, thank you.
Okay, sorry guys. So as I was saying, yes, a large majority of lambs die within the first 3 days typically, which is about 74%. And one of the biggest contributing factors is dystocia, which is obviously birthing difficulties. And this can lead to stillbirths and or delayed death due to starvation, mismothering and exposure later on. So as you can see from the pie graph, we've got displayed that, yes, birth-related dystocia is one of the major causes. So
Now we can't hear you, Megan. I don't know why.
Okay.
That's better.
That's better? Okay. I have to be more in the middle. So as Billy mentioned, the birthing process is a big problem with lamb death. So about 70% of these is related to birth hypoxia, which is a lack of oxygen getting to the lamb. During the birth process, it's very normal for lambs to experience this, but it's when it's a lengthened process or through multiples, so that second and that third lamb is getting higher or less oxygen. And this can be really negative for the lambs, so it can damage their brain, nervous system and vital organs. They have impaired neuromotor activity, so this means they take longer to stand, longer to get to the udder to have that first feed, and reduction in vocalization. It also impairs their thermoregulation, and then there also is a greater chance of maternal rejection. So all of these things together increase the chance that the lamb won't survive.
So I guess based on that background information, the key objectives of this large project was to increase the ability of twin lambs to cope with birth hypoxia. And I guess one of the outcomes was if there's more vigorous lambs, more vigorous vital lambs with the ability to thrive when the environment is challenging. And then obviously this would lead to more twin lambs weaned, because essentially that equals more profit at the end of the day for all the producers around the nation. And we targeted 2 supplements during this project, which was betaine and melatonin, which was to be supplemented at a few different stages of gestation during the testing period. So I guess essentially see which time of gestation would be the most superior to supplement them.
So the first one looked at is betaine. So this one was done in feed. So betaine is very important in lots of cellular processes and important in the production of creatine within the body. The good thing about betaine is it can pass the ova and placenta, and then this can increase creatine production in utero. And creatine then acts as a fetal neuroprotectant, and it also has the capacity to then reduce effects of heat stress during conception and also gestation. So the other supplement we looked at was melatonin, and this was through the commercial product Regulin. So we looked at this, which is a subcutaneous implant, and in stage 1, which we'll kind of explain a little bit later, was also done through the feed. So melatonin we looked at because it's a really potent antioxidant, and it also helps with enhancing uterine blood flow and fetal oxygenation.
So I guess this project was set out to form 3 stages. So stage 1 was kind of intensive studies done in an animal house environment, which is obviously a bit more controlled than a natural paddock environment. But doing it in an animal house enabled us to collect a variety of more intensive measures, so like blood samples, colostrum samples from the ewes as well, and various other measures. One of the key things with the animal house, it enabled us to analyse lamb behaviour through video footage, which was a key thing looking at in stage 1. So, and then if we got good results from the stage 1 of the project with betaine and melatonin, it progressed to stage 2, which was more field research, but still this was more intensive than just typical lambing rounds in Australia. So we would go out and check the ewes every day. We would weigh them, collect a blood sample from the lambs, tag them, and then would also collect a rectal temperature from them. But again, it matched, this kind of stage matched their natural, I guess, birthing environment as opposed to the stage 1. And then if we got positive results from the stage 2, it then progressed to stage 3, which was commercial validation. So this is where we tested it at actual commercial properties across South Australia. And yeah, this involved, a few producers around the state, which was pretty cool. So that's kind of how the project was laid out. So there was a stop-go point for each supplement. And if we got positive results at each stage, it progressed to the next stage.
So as Billy kind of mentioned, stage 1 intensive indoor. So you can just see all the measures collected there. So a lot of lamb measures, and then we also got you live weights and body condition score, and also parturition difficulty. Stage 2, as Billy said, a bit more of that in-between stage, so still getting measures of lamb viability and vigour where we could, and then survival at marking and weaning, plus the ewe live weight and body condition score. And then stage 3, which was commercial validation, and this was done on 3 properties. So this was all, again, twin lamb survival, and we were doing that based on expected lambs compared to the lambs alive at marking and weaning, and again, ewe body condition score.
Cool. So I'll quickly run through, I guess, this initial part for the betaine project, which formed my PhD. So the stage 1 of this project, obviously, like I said, was an indoors intensive monitoring under the animal house, which was conducted at Tscharke Field Research Centre. And I guess the aim of this first project that I did was more lamb viability focused. So it was to determine whether supplementing the diets of twin ewes with 2 different doses of betaine would improve measures of lamb viability as well as survival. And I guess the key outcomes from this first trial that kind of formed my honours was feeding 2 grams of betaine throughout the whole duration of pregnancy resulted in lambs that were 3.5 kilograms heavier at weaning compared with the controls. And then we also saw a positive outcome with the 4-gram dose, which was supplemented from mid-pregnancy, and it showed that improved lamb vigour in the form of that it reduced the time interval from birth to first suckle from the ewe. And this ultimately, I think, was linked to the fact that this treatment also had higher survival rates to day 7 for this trial, which was very interesting. And then I also completed another study which was more metabolite focused. So obviously we got the physical measures from the lambs, but we also wanted to see it from more a physiological point of view by looking at various metabolites from their plasma. So again, this aim was to look at various circulating metabolites, including betaine itself, as well as other amino acids. But unfortunately, we couldn't get twin ewes for this trial, but we used single bearing. And we performed a series of blood samples from these animals during this time. I guess the key outcome was that we found that feeding betaine at both dosage levels actually increased the betaine concentration in the ewes, which has never actually been shown before, which was pretty cool. And then we also found that the 2 gram per day dosage of betaine actually increased methionine levels in the ewes, which again hasn't been shown in pregnant sheep before using betaine supplementation. So again, that was quite a nice takeaway from the project. And this kind of insinuated that based on methionine's role, it could have potentially progressed to increasing creatine concentrations. But unfortunately for this trial, we couldn't analyse creatine levels. But this didn't correspond to any improvements in the newborn lambs, unfortunately. So that kind of formed part 1, or stage 1 of the betaine work. So obviously, because we got a few positive results from this intensive monitoring, it naturally progressed to stage 2, which was done at Bobbie Research Centre down in the southeast. I did 2 trials across 2 years, and the first year we had 3 treatment groups which were the same dosage. So because of the results we saw with both intensive trials in the previous slide, we decided to investigate the 4-gram dose more, and we looked at that from mid-gestation supplementation as well as late gestation. But unfortunately, we had a few problems in the first year with the late betaine treatment use. We found that they were quite compromised coming into the trial, so we couldn't take away very many key findings from that initial trial. So we decided to complete another year of that same trial, but we kind of tweaked it to make it a bit easier for monitoring and also to prevent the problems that we saw in the previous year. So again, in the second year, we fed the 4-gram dose of betaine from late gestation. So we only had 2 treatments, which was definitely more manageable because we had roughly about 400 ewes in the first year that we had to monitor in the paddock. And then the second year, I think we reduced it to, I would say probably 300, I think. So a lot less monitoring, which was good. And I guess the key takeaways, what we found from the second year of the betaine in the field conditions was that it actually increased creatine levels in the ewes 20 days after we started supplementation, which again hasn't been shown in paddock environment before. So I thought that was quite an interesting takeaway message. And the other thing that we found was that it improved lamb rectal temperature within the first 4 to 24 hours. So again, that's a massive takeaway for the project as well, because obviously thermoregulation in their natural environment is obviously very critical for them to survive. But unfortunately, we didn't find that it improved twin lamb survival as well as other measures of lamb viability. So unfortunately, because of the key outcomes from both of those years, the betaine work didn't progress to stage 3, which was the commercial validation. So that's kind of that.
All right, moving on to melatonin. So the stage 1, so that involved the control group and then melatonin being delivered via feed or oral administration. And then the third was the Regulin implant. So within this stage 1, as Billy mentioned, in the animal house, so intensive. So we got some positive results from that. So thermoregulation, serum IgG and lamb survival were all increased with melatonin treatment, but birth weight and weaning weight were unaffected. And the really interesting thing here was that the survival was mostly increased in the second born lamb. So then it moved to stage 2, and this was done at Minapa Agricultural Centre. And the results from this, again, really positive, which was great. So it showed that twin lamb survival was improved by 8% under these conditions. Within this trial, we just stuck with the Regulin implant, but we also looked at whether having 1 or 2 implants, so changing the dosage, whether that would impact the results, but it didn't. So kind of good to know that even with 1 implant, you're still getting good results. Despite the increase in survival, there was no differences in birth weight, rectal temperature, meconium score through this trial. So because of that positive results, the melatonin did move to stage 3, which was done on commercial properties. But unfortunately, there was no positive results seen with the use of melatonin on these commercial properties. However, despite this, I guess over the last, roughly 3 years, we have continued to look at the effects of melatonin on commercial properties, even though we didn't see it in this stage 3. So for stage 3, we looked at 3 properties. So we've extended this over the last 3 years, and we've gone to over 25 properties across South Australia and looked at the effects of Regulin as, we're really interested to see if it does help on commercial properties.
So in terms of the industry implications of this project, I guess developing cost-effective practical strategies to improve twin lamb survival is a key outcome for the industry at the moment, as yes, we're continuing to lose lambs, but obviously we want to reduce that and increase financial gain and improve the welfare of the animals as well. So this project used a 3-stage approach, like I mentioned, to create a clear path for commercial adoption. Although betaine and melatonin did not boost lamb survival on farm, the project still revealed quite valuable data and insights into both supplements, and just kind of highlights the need of what areas we can work through and research with using both of them in the future. And I guess understanding the underlying mechanisms of both could lead to more effective strategies for improving lamb viability. And one of the things we did discover with the betaine project was we need to obviously develop a more accurate delivery of like supplements via lick feeders, as this was quite a challenge for the betaine research. So yes, developing something a bit more like that in the future is definitely key to be able to implement our research strategies on site and increase the accuracy of the data as well.
So yeah, just listed here is everyone involved in the trials. So as mentioned, it was a really big collaborative project, between the University of Adelaide and SRSP. So we couldn't get all this work done without everyone listed here. So a big thank you to all of them there and everyone involved. And that's it from us.
That's great. A great presentation. Just giving us overview of that project. And I guess what it really highlights is that lamb survival is one of those wicked problems, isn't it? There's so many things that are affected, and being able to identify and hone in on specific areas in commercial situations is really quite difficult. So really building that knowledge about those underlying mechanisms is sort of really important. Megan, you mentioned you'd sort of kept doing a bit of work on melatonin and those other commercial properties. Has anything interesting popped out from those other 25 properties in the last couple of years?
Yes, definitely. We've seen some really good results with the use of Regulins. So we did slightly change the use. So in this project that we just mentioned, we were implanting Regulin at roughly day 90. So whenever the producer was doing pregnancy scanning. So we kind of then went back to look at the mechanistics a bit and figured out if that was the best time of implant, and maybe that's why we weren't seeing an increase in survival on commercial properties. So the research that we continued to do, we actually changed the timing of the implant, and we implanted it just prior to joining. And from that, we've seen, off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure it was the average of a 19% increase in pregnancy scanning rates. And yeah, that's across the 3 years. So yeah, we've seen some really good results with Regulin. And a few properties we've then followed through to survival at marking and weaning, and again seen an increase in those lamb numbers with the use of Regulin. So we think it was just a timing thing and figuring out when the Regulin needed to be administered to be most effective in the sheep.
Oh, that's good, because every little bit of information adds to the puzzle, doesn't it, to help us chip away. So that's great. So just check if anyone in the audience has any questions you want to put onto the chat. We can just give another minute, see if any of those turn up. No one seems to be furiously typing, but so I'd just like to really thank our presenters for today. They've given us a really great overview of those 3 current projects and where things are up to. And I guess okay, we've got one question in. So Gordon wants to know, is the season of lambing important to melatonin outcomes? So what impact is time of lambing on what you see with melatonin?
Yes, for sure. So as I guess Bobbie previously mentioned as well, it's a bit of a seasonal breeding with the sheep. So I guess because we were doing it at joining, we found that melatonin was even more effective when sheep were being bred or being joined to get a bit more out of season. So producers, I guess here in South Australia, are generally joining between December to March-ish. And then, so those producers that were joining between December to January were getting a greater increase in their lamb or the fetal numbers being scanned when they were using melatonin compared to the ones, oh, sorry, he's saying effects on lamb survival.
Not mating.
Sorry. I guess we didn't really look too much into timing wise with the lambing. Unfortunately, it was all, yeah, I think they were, from the top of my head, they were all done at the same time.
Similar times, yeah.
Yeah, so not really sure about timing, unfortunately.
Okay, well, something to maybe put into future work.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I'll just draw it to a close, conscious of time. So thank you very much for everyone for attending, and a big thank you again to our 4 producers. It was great to feature early career presenters, and you've given us a really professional presentation and really showed us that the future of sheep research is in good hands. So thank you everyone for attending. If you have any questions that you weren't asked, you can contact me. All of you should have my email address from the RDNA alerts, and I can pass those on to the presenters. And if you have any burning issues you want us to cover in future webinars, just let me know. So thank you everyone. Thank you for participating. Again, big thanks to our presenters, and have a wonderful rest of your day.